we're up to the #1 song in the USA, brought to you by Sears. This week's #1 comes from one of today's top video artists, Janet Jackson. Now, ironically, for such a successful video artist, Janet used to be very shy. And one of the things Janet found most painful was seeing herself on television. In fact, Janet remembers one time when she was a teenager that her family actually had to chase her down and make her watch herself. Janet says she and her brother Randy had taped an appearance together on the Merv Griffin show. She says, when it came on, I hid under the bed. My brothers were pulling me out by my legs. Janet says she finally did come out from under the bed and sat in front of the TV, and at first just squeezed her eyes tightly shut. But then, slowly, she opened them and looked at her performance, painful as it was. Over the years, though, Janet says she's learned to watch herself on television without being quite so embarrassed. As Janet puts it, quote, I make myself watch myself in order to better myself. And better herself she has. The videos for her Control album broke new creative ground. And the full video of her new album, Rhythm Nation 1814, is one of the most ambitious projects in recent memory. It's a mini-movie that runs almost 30 minutes. A project Janet created, co-wrote, and of course stars in. Quite an accomplishment for a woman who used to be so shy. And Janet has another accomplishment to be proud of. In 7 short weeks, her first single from Rhythm Nation climbed the pop chart all the way to #1. And now, for the second week in a row, it's the most popular single in the USA. The #1 song on Casey's Top 40 this week is Miss You Much by Janet Jackson. Well, now we're up to the #1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40, and it's by a superstar who recently did a big show that turned into a real royal embarrassment. Here's the story. A few months ago, Janet Jackson was asked to do a command performance for the Queen of England. Naturally, Janet was thrilled. A kid from Gary, Indiana was finally playing the palace. Well, the night of the performance, Janet was understandably a bit nervous. She says there were butterflies in her stomach as she stood backstage getting ready for the most famous audience she'd ever performed for. But seasoned pro that she is, when she heard the music, she took a deep breath, went on stage, and did it. Janet sang 3 of her best songs that night, and she was dazzling. But her outfit did something unique in the history of royal performances. Every time Janet would do any sort of knee drop on stage, her pants would come apart at the knees. Janet says, quote, eventually, both my knees on the pants were ripped open. You could see the knee pads I was wearing. And then my pants started ripping up and down the leg. I was so embarrassed, I thought I was going to die. Janet says it was the single most humiliating moment of her life. After all, it was in front of the Queen. And if that wasn't enough, right after she finished, Janet had to step up and be introduced to Her Royal Highness, ripped pants and all. Janet says, quote, the Queen handled it just perfectly. Her eyes never left mine. She never looked down at my tattered clothes. And Janet says she wishes the scandal-loving British tabloids could have done the same. Instead, they ran banner headlines proclaiming, Michael Jackson's sister wears rags to the palace. Well, Janet's gotten over all that. She's left those embarrassing moments far behind. And this week, instead of making bad jokes at her expense, the headlines in the newspapers could read, Janet once again rules the chart. The #1 song in the USA for the 3rd week in a row is Escapade by Janet Jackson. There's a singer who spent her 24th birthday this week at a special party in Japan's Tokyo Disneyland. She's Mickey Mouse fan Janet Jackson, climbing a notch to #3 with All Right.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Casey's Top 40 originates in Hollywood. Now we're up to Janet Jackson's latest hit, Black Cat, and the bad luck she had with the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, when she crossed paths with a real black cat. It all happened when Janet began her worldwide Rhythm Nation tour back in March. One of the things she decided to do to make her show extra special was to use an actual black leopard when she sang Black Cat. The idea was that midway through the song, the leopard would magically appear on stage thanks to a hidden elevator built into the set. As you probably know, Janet's a dedicated animal lover who's always had many pets and supported animal rights groups. So she did everything she could to make sure the leopard got the best treatment. But what she didn't know was that every city has its own different rules concerning the use of wild animals on stage. And when Janet got to Cleveland, she found she was in a lot of hot water. It seems that in Cleveland, it's against the law to exhibit a wild animal without a special permit. And there were also all sorts of city health rules that had to be adhered to. What's more, the local branch of the ASPCA was dead set against Janet using a leopard on stage. When Janet discovered the problems she faced, she reconsidered using that leopard. Even though she'd taken all the precautions she could, she finally decided to ship the animal back to the wildlife refuge it came from. And she made a sizable contribution to the ASPCA. All told, not using that leopard cost Janet $100,000, money that included the cost of shipping the animal back, paying out the contract that had been signed for the use of it, and donating money to the ASPCA, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. But Janet says the cost didn't matter. Quote, "I'd never do anything to intentionally harm an animal. If anyone thought I was doing the wrong thing, I was going to make it right, no matter what it cost me." Well, this week, the woman who spent $100,000 to do the right thing with the real black cat is doing the right thing with her song, Black Cat, as well.
American Top 40.
Okay, dancers, this one's for you. If you've ever wondered what it takes to be a dancer on tour with a lady at number 12, we have the answer. Janet Jackson works with her choreographer, Tina Landon. And here's what it takes.
I think the most important thing, obviously, being funky as well as being able to do a lot of the technical stuff. But more important than any of that to me is the attitude, not just their attitude dancing, but their actual attitude. And you can really tell if they're really a good person from the heart. And just someone who likes to have a lot of fun. That's what's most important to me. I think we had like 1,000 kids that actually auditioned. The day I flew in, right from the airport, I went to the auditions. And the last few kids, we auditioned. And from there, we got our 8.
Casey's Top 40.
For Casey Kasem, I'm David Perry. Well, now we're up to the number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40, and it's by a superstar who wanted to show her thanks to the brave men who saved her home during the recent Malibu fires. So she did something very special. Despite the terrible loss of hundreds of homes during the firestorm a few weeks ago in the affluent seaside California community of Malibu, thousands of other homes were saved. They were saved by legions of firemen who arrived from all over the state and from other places along the West Coast as well. One of the homes saved by those courageous men is a massive custom-built mansion where the superstar who sings this week's number 1 lives when she's not in the studio or on the road. And like many of the people whose property was kept from the flames by the round-the-clock efforts of the firemen, this woman wanted to do something to show her thanks. And for her, sending them food and coffee during the disaster didn't seem like enough. As she watched the men, tired and exhausted from the intense physical work they were doing, she came up with an idea. As soon as the fires died down, she hired a team of a dozen masseurs to set up their tables at the Malibu fire station. And those masseurs gave any fireman who wanted one a soothing rub-down for his tired, aching muscles. This week, the superstar who went out of her way to help soothe those exhausted firemen is soothing the rest of us with her music. Because for the 5th week in a row, her tender ballad is the biggest hit in the land. The number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40 is Again by Janet Jackson.
I heard from a friend today, and she said you were in town.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the latest smash for a superstar who got her musical start on stage in Las Vegas at the age of 7, doing imitations of Mae West and Cher. It was back in 1974 that this very young future star made her performing debut. Her brothers Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael were booked at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, at the time the biggest hotel in America. It was a major appearance for the Jackson 5, and they wanted to give it their all. So not only did they come out and do their hits, they also tossed in a lot of surprises, like appearances by sisters LaToya and Rebe Jackson, and the very special on-stage debut of 7-year-old Janet. They brought her out at the end of the show just before the finale, and the audience went wild. Since Janet didn't have any songs of her own at the time, she sang a few numbers her brothers had made famous. Then she and her brother, 15-year-old Michael, did a duet, their rendition of the smash I Got You, Babe, where Michael did Sonny's part and Janet vamped like Cher. And if that weren't enough, Janet brought the house down with her imitation of Mae West as she sashayed up to Jermaine and said, "Come up and see me sometime." The people in the audience that night knew the 7-year-old had something special, but few could predict that she'd turn into one of the biggest stars in the world, a woman who's had 18 top 10s.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
Well, now we're up to the song You Want This. It's by a superstar with a very unexpected ambition. She wants to spend a week working the drive-in window at a fast food restaurant. She's 28-year-old Janet Jackson, and recently she told a reporter that one of the great regrets she has is that she's never worked at a normal job. She's been a show business star since she was 7 years old when she made her on-stage debut in Las Vegas with her brothers, the Jackson 5. Janet says, quote, "It's hard coming from a famous family. I felt alone and never felt like a real person. I missed out on a regular childhood. I'd like to catch up on some of that," unquote. Well, one way that Janet fantasizes about playing catch-up is by trying her hand in disguise at a regular everyday job. She wants to work at one of the many fast food outlets she sees all over Los Angeles. Janet says, quote, "It's just something I want to experience, to work the drive-through window, to say, 'Welcome, may I take your order, please?'" So if you're in L.A. and stop for a fast snack, take a close look at the person who serves you. It just could be one of the biggest superstars around.
Casey's biggest hits.
A year ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was Runaway by a superstar who says she grew up wearing hand-me-downs from her older sisters. She knew she was finally a star when she started buying outfits of her own. Janet Jackson is the youngest of the 9 Jackson children, including older sisters LaToya and Rebe. Janet says until she was in her early teens, her wardrobe consisted mostly of outfits her big sisters didn't want anymore. And then she landed a role on the TV series Good Times and another one on Different Strokes. Janet says one of the first things she did with her earnings was run out and buy some clothes of her own. For Janet, success meant she didn't have to wear her sisters' outfits anymore.
Casey counts them down.
We're playing the biggest hits in the USA by the biggest stars in the world. Rising 2 notches to number 14 this week is Janet, an international superstar who says, quote, "Work is part of my genetic code. Work is in my blood. My response to adversity is always the same. Work harder," unquote. Here's the hardworking Janet with Go Deep. Well, now we're up to a hit from the film Nutty Professor 2, a movie that Janet Jackson was asked to write a song for if she felt like it. Well, she felt like it enough to score her first hit in 2 years. Janet appears in Nutty Professor 2 as the love interest of Sherman Klump, who's played by Eddie Murphy. For Janet, it was an acting job. The idea of her singing a song on the soundtrack never came up when she was hired for the film. After she was done with her part, Janet went off to Flight Time Studios in Minneapolis to work on her next album with her longtime collaborators, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. She was deep into production when the film's director dropped by with a rough cut of the film for Janet, Jimmy, and Terry to see. After they watched it, he told Janet, "If you'd like to do a song for it, that'd be great." There was no pressure here. It was really, if you feel like it, great. But he did tell Janet he needed to know by May 15th. Well, it started Janet thinking and writing a song that expressed what her character in the film was feeling. The feeling that, quote, "It's what's inside that counts." Well, this week, that song moves up 5 notches to number 25 on American Top 40, her first hit in 2 years. Here's Janet with her movie hit, Doesn't Really Matter.
Doesn't matter if you're feeling insecure. Doesn't matter if you're feeling so sure.
Counting down the hits with Casey Kasem.